to capture photographs. I prefer to use a mobile phone than to use you know, an external camera device. External camera devices can be somewhat intrusive, especially if the building is occupied. So sometimes you might be viewing a property that is rented, and you might have the people in the property, and sometimes people can feel that it's slightly intrusive if you have this big recording device walking through their home. So it's best to just use your phone. You can do it discreetly. Um, on the other hand, if you do not have a mobile phone that has a recording device, certainly you should always ensure that you go with an external camera. Usually, with properties that are for sale, there are always photographs that are provided. The photographs are usually prepared by the sales agent. Never rely on photographs or videos from the sales agent. The reason for that is because the agent has a specific job in mind. The job is to ensure that they actually sell the property. And what I have found, and this is not indicative of every single agent, but what I have found is there are some times when I've noticed that the agent's photographs were primarily taken with the sole intent of selling the property. And it's not unusual to observe that the agent's photographs, they bear no resemblance to the actual state of the property when you visit. Sometimes I've walked into properties and said, is this a different building? Because the photographs I was provided with was very different to what I saw. You could find sometimes that the photographs represent when the building was originally renovated, and that could go back as long as 7, 8 years. And upon arrival, obviously there's been wear and tear, and the building has been occupied, so it looks very different. But that doesn't really bother me as much. What bothers me is that in certain instances, I have found that wide angled lens have been used by the agent, and this has the effect of making the property look very flattering and much larger than it really is. So keep in mind, you need to record and make videos for yourself. And then number 8 is a stopwatch. A stopwatch. The purpose of the stopwatch is quite simple. You need a stopwatch so that you can time how long you spend during your inspection, to keep an accurate emphasis on the inspection process. Now, depending on the type and the size of the property, you should try to spend at least an hour during your in-person inspection. In my case, I tend to make allowances for 30 minutes for the external, and then 30 minutes for the internal areas of the building, respectively. So 30 minutes for outside, 30 minutes for inside. Now, the purpose of your stopwatch is just so you know, it helps you, for me particularly, it helps me slow down the process so that I maintain control of the viewing. And more importantly, so that you do not rush. It is the case that the agents want you in and out as fast as possible. But if you go back to the comment I made about collecting data, you're never going to have another opportunity once you've made an offer to retract your offer once there's been contract exchange and sign and it's been signed. So you want to ensure you collect as much information, and most people tend to hurry through the viewing process. I like to slow things down. My recommendation to you is to slow things down. A stopwatch provides that opportunity for you to slow things down. And the way the stopwatch does this is that if you have a stopwatch and you start the timer and you notice that you've done everything in under 5 minutes, that is an indication that you should spend more time. On the other hand, if you spend 25 minutes or 27 minutes on the inside compared to 30 minutes, which was your limit, then it means you've spent enough time. And my experience has been that if you keep in mind that there is a positive correlation between how much time you spend inspecting a property and the quality of your findings, just keep that in mind. There is a positive correlation between how much time you spend inspecting a property and the quality of your findings. So the more time you spend, the better the quality and the better the quantity of data you can collect or information you can glean. You should never work to the agent's time constraints. Always stay disciplined and make sure that you're not rushed. You do not rush the inspection. Certainly, if there is a time constraint by the agent, it's up to you to negotiate for a different time or a different date to view. Now, with all of these 8 items I've provided, I hope you can see that if you have all of these items, the possibility and the likelihood of collecting much more quality data increases. With this information, certainly, I would imagine, that the quality and the quantity of information obtained during your inspection will be much greater. I should say that this is not a guarantee. There is no guarantee that if you have all of these items, these 8 items, there is no guarantee that you would find all the information you need. And the reason is simply because there's something else you need. And I've given you items that you should bring with you. But there is something else you should keep in mind, and that is you need to be curious. You need curiosity during your viewing. You've heard curiosity kill the cat. I think I heard that when I was quite young. I'm not sure why such a false statement was told to kids, but most people are not curious. Your role when you view a property is not that of an investor. Your role is not that of a home buyer. Rather, your role is that of an observer, a data gatherer. You're looking to collect as much data as you can and as much data as you need for your analysis. The analysis is not done during your inspection. The decision to buy the property is not done during your inspection. The analysis and decision has to be made afterwards. So you need to be curious. Curiosity is what enables you to gather and to search for more information. So the more curious you are, the more inquisitive you are, the more unafraid or unashamed you are to ask questions, the better the quality of data or information you can collect. And then finally, number 2 is something that I mentioned before, a time window. Now this time window, I mentioned a few minutes back, was that if you consider that you would spend 30 minutes inside and 30 minutes on the outside, that gives you a time window for the inspection. But you also have to keep in mind, if you can, a half hour before, so let's say you have a viewing at 4:30 p.m. That's your viewing. You have 30 minutes for the inside, 30 minutes for the outside. Viewing from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. You should keep a time window before, and you should keep a time window after the viewing. I tend to prefer to keep another 30 minutes before and another 30 minutes after. And the reason for this is because you might need some time to explore the local area. You might need time to walk around the streets, walk down the street and look at the other buildings, stand at the corner of the junction of the street and just observe the quality of people who live in the area. Now, I will be discussing in greater detail in the sessions to come what you would do with this time, the time before and after. I think you will be surprised at how much more you can actually gain if you did that. Now, keep in mind that successful viewings are always a product of managed expectations. It's no different from any relationship or any, whether that's a business relationship or a familial relationship or an intimate relationship. The success is always a product of managed expectations. In this case, because you're inspecting a property, it has to do with managing the expectations of yourself and managing the expectations of the agent. So in the concluding time that we have, let me share perhaps one or two things to keep in mind. You would have noticed that I've stressed the importance of time. That means you cannot just assume that the agents will understand your requirements. So the first thing you have to do is ensure that you inform the agents of a few things. The first is that inform them that you would prefer the place or the building to be vacant during your inspection. There could be exceptions to this. If you're viewing for the second time and you've already decided to make an offer, it's possible that you may not bother too much if the building is occupied. Some buildings sometimes are rented. Sometimes the building could actually be owner occupied. If the building is owner occupied, you have to be careful. If you're buying through an agent, sometimes meeting the owner, if the building is owner occupied, can have its advantages. And one of the advantages is that you can build some rapport with the owner. You can ask direct questions, which usually most agents do not know. Now, let me say something perhaps that is, and I hope this doesn't come across as wrong, or, I don't mean to indict most sales agents, but my experience has been a very, only in 1 out of 10 viewings have I found sales property agents to be competent. Very few of them have any knowledge about the property they're trying to sell. They're always deferring and saying that they'll get back to you with the information. So if the building is owner occupied, you can ask questions directly. You can even infer directly if there could be any sale concessions. And you could even ask the owner directly, why they're looking to sell. And you always have to pay attention to what is said, but also to the unspoken words. So sometimes the owner can tell you, we're looking to sell because my daughter, my son has just graduated. We need to find a new school. They could even tell you that they have already made an offer on a different building and they're hoping to sell really quickly. If you have that information, that gives you the opportunity to ensure that you use that information to your advantage as a way of bargaining or negotiating. You may have heard of the whole term about motivated sellers. The way to know if someone is motivated, or the way to understand the motivations of a seller, is by conversation, is by communication. So keep that in mind. Now, if you go to view a property and the building is occupied, in this case, let's assume it's occupied by the tenant, it's often also very advantageous to speak to the tenant because you can find out a lot of past and ongoing issues, repair issues, neighborly matters, and you can even find out about their experience of living in the building and in the local area. And most tenants have no reservations, and they can tell you how they feel, how their experience of the neighborhood has been, and that could be very, very useful, especially in helping you form, a decision as to whether you would proceed with the property or not. So keep that in mind. My experience has been that I am often amazed at how much goodwill or insight I have obtained from a friendly conversation. So do not rule out viewing a property that is occupied. My preference is for the building to be empty and to be vacant when I view, because I like to have the freedom of moving between spaces without feeling like I'm intrusive. But if the place is occupied, then I usually turn that around and make sure that I use that to my benefit. Now, the second item is to inform the agent that you would prefer a private viewing rather than a group viewing. Agents prefer to schedule their viewings, if they can, in groups. Or what they do is they overlap viewing times. They do this very, very intelligently, because what they're hoping to do is they know that Sally will arrive at 3 and she's going to be there for, let's say, 15 minutes. They would schedule a viewing with James for, say, 3:10, and another viewing with Alyssa, or let's say Alison, for, say, 3:20. The whole purpose being that when Sally finishes a viewing, she comes out of the house, she sees James. Sometimes she might even see Alison. Or sometimes they might just keep it as an open viewing so that all of them can see each other. The purpose of that is so that each person recognizes that the building has a lot of interest. So inform the agent that you would prefer a private viewing rather than a group viewing. In my opinion, I think if the agent does not inform you in advance, they're being slightly unprofessional. Sometimes they can be that way in the manner in which they group or they book group viewings without informing prospective buyers. But just keep that in mind, because I've seen too many times overlapping times with the intention of starting up a bidding frenzy amongst prospective buyers. Group viewings are expected in certain scenarios, such as when you're buying through an auction or if you're buying through an open house. But these are exceptions. They're not the rule. So just make sure, in terms of managing expectations, you reach out to the agent and clarify. Now, I made reference to the fact that you need 30 minutes on the inside, 30 minutes on the outside. So number 3 is you have to inform the agent that you intend to spend an hour at the property. 30 minutes is what you need for the inside and 30 minutes for the outside. The agent doesn't really care so much about what you do outside, because they can allow you to spend as much time on the streets and look at the property if you need to, but they need to know how long you intend to spend in the property so they can manage their time. So always inform them as to how much you need for the inside of the property. If the property is a house and has a garden, and if the garden is only accessible through the house, then take into account that if you need 30 minutes for the inside and 30 minutes for the outside, if this is a detached house, then always bear in mind that the 30 minutes for the outside is something you have to spread across the 4 different elevations of the property: the rear, the front, the side, and the side. So in principle, you're looking at roughly 7.5 minutes for each side. Now, the reason I'm explaining this is because if this property can only be accessible, it's only accessible for inspection in terms of the exterior, if you can only do that with the agent's consent, then you have to tell the agent that you need 1 hour. If, on the other hand, this property is such that it's positioned, let's say it's a townhouse, and it's on the street, it means you can stand on the street and observe the front of the building. There could be an opportunity for you to stand on the street, assuming it has a side street, and you can observe the side of the building. But the other sides that are not accessibly available, you have to take that, combine such the time needed, say the rear and the side That's 15 minutes. So you should be telling the agent that you need 15 minutes plus 30 minutes, which is 45 minutes. Now, I have seen in many occasions that most agents can be quite accommodating. They just need to know, and you need to inform them in advance. I would also recommend that when you arrive, once the agent has let you into the property, you should always ask for the freedom to inspect the property independently. I always make it a priority, if I can, not to follow the agent on their sales pitch. Usually they want to walk you through the place, and whilst they're explaining and talking, it's very hard for you to intuit clearly about the property. If the agent is delivering a sales pitch, it's very hard for you to try and think carefully. So if you can, don't be ashamed to say, I like to be left alone so I can look at the property myself. Usually good agents usually discern when they have an experienced buyer and when they have a less experienced buyer. And good agents will normally leave you alone. They'll give you some space. Now, I hope that's been useful. Let me think of something else. I would say maybe number 4 is, if you can, in advance of your viewing, have all the prior questions concerning the property answered before you arrive, so that you can verify the accuracy in person. For questions that cannot be answered upon arrival, make sure you have them written down so that you can have them answered at the site. So, for example, it's possible to have the answers by observation, or by inference, or by asking. So just keep in mind that the questions you've asked about the property, ideally, you want to know what those answers are. Number 5, if you can, inform the agent before you arrive that you will be taking pictures and you will be making videos of the place. Now, this is very important, because if the property is occupied by a tenant or by the owner-occupier, some people have privacy concerns, and they might have their family photos and their personal items in full display. So always ask if it's acceptable. The last thing you want is to be denied consent upon arrival. So my advice would be, if they refuse and they say you cannot take photographs or make a video, I would just cancel the viewing and move on to another opportunity. The only exception to this is if it's an experienced or technically astute buyer. People who have the experience are exempt. I can walk into a place, because I've been doing this for so long. I can walk into a place and I can make my mind on the spot without necessarily requiring all of the data collection and analysis. Less experienced buyers, on the other hand, should never place all their trust on memory. This is why you need to take photographs and you need to make videos. Now, one of the reasons for all of this is because sometimes you might find that you have questions that have to be answered by a professional. And it's so easy to send a photograph to a builder or send a video to a plumber and ask them for a quote for the repairs. So the reason for collecting all this data and taking pictures and making videos is not just for your decision making. It's also to inform anyone else who could be helping you in your decision making process. Now, I hope that's been useful. In the session that follows, the next session, I will, we've gone on. I like to keep this under an hour, so I'll stop for now. And in the next session, I'll conclude on what I think are maybe 2 or 3 additional items to keep in mind when you're viewing a property. For the sake of time, we'll stop today and pick it up in the next session. In the next session, I'll begin by talking about 1 or 2 things that I also try to do when I arrive, and even before I arrive for a viewing. Now, I hope that's been useful.